Welcome to the Faith XP podcast, where we dig deep into the Bible one book at a time, breaking down its verses in a way that everyone can understand. Our goal is to make the Bible approachable for everyone, whether you're new to the faith or a seasoned believer. Join us as we explore the wisdom of the Word and level up our faith together. Welcome to episode 2 of the Faith XP podcast. We've made it to 2 episodes. That's got to be a new record. And we've actually gotten a lot of positive feedback from the first episode. So thanks to everyone who's listened so far. And if you haven't, well,
thanks anyway.
Yeah, thanks anyway. So I sent you a Spotify link. I don't know if you listened to it yet, but it is a young musician called Jonas Connor. And I stumbled across him on Instagram randomly. He sings a song called Father in a Bible.
Ooh.
It's freaking good, dude. People, if you're driving to work, just stop your car. I give you permission to stop your car in the middle of the road and turn the song on right now and come back to this episode afterwards. But yeah, dude, the song's super good, so you should definitely check that out. Also, talking about things I've been up to this week, I finally got my Lord of the Rings Conquer medal in. I've told you about it. It's the Conquer virtual challenge, and basically you can sign up for different challenges.
Hiking across Middle Earth kind of thing?
Yeah, that's what this one is. And I just got out of the Shire, which I think was 145 miles.
That's a solid way of combining one thing I really love, Tolkien, and something I really hate, walking.
The one side is a front of a hobbit home. And the backside is a letter that says, keep it secret, keep it safe. And if you open the letter, if I could open it, there is the one ring to rule them all.
That's wild. Hold on. I'll do you one for anybody listening to everything. I'll do you one better. This is my wedding ring. You can't see it. It's not in focus. There it is. It's the one ring.
It's always a competition with this guy, I swear.
Hey, man, I couldn't let you. I couldn't. It's not the one ring. It's one of 2 rings that you have, clearly, because I have the other one on my ring finger.
Now that I finished that one, I can start the next one. I think there's 4 or 5 things until I get to Mordor, and then each one comes with a medal once you complete it.
How many miles is it to Mordor? Forget.
I want to say it's like 900 something.
That's it?
So yeah, we are not sponsored by Conquer, by the way. But there is a Jesus one, a faith challenge. I don't know the distance on it, but I want to check it out.
I don't know. Jesus walked a while. Paul walked a good bit too. He traveled a good bit anyway. You know, hey, you know the platinum one, the ultimate walk challenge. You'd have it be the numbers challenge. Then you follow the trail of the Hebrews in the wilderness for 40 years. That's next level.
Another thing is we went to Town Park and did the little Halloween thing. I dressed up as Cookie Monster, and Melina dressed up as Elmo. Ashby was dressed up as Abby. What's your take on Halloween? Because you have so many people who say Christians shouldn't practice Halloween. It's a satanic.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it's not originally. I mean, you could say there's like people have picked Halloween to make it into a really pagan, like witch bad day and everything. But initially, Halloween is just All Saints Day. All Hallows Eve is what it was. It was the night before All Saints Day, which was not originally a pagan holiday. It was actually kind of a diss to the pagan nations and stuff. It was saying that the saints and the angels and the good people, the warriors for God, replaced all the pagan nations as the ones leading humanity with God to a different people, like to become better than what we ever were. So it was really kind of like a victory march of the saints saying, hey, we beat out the demonic forces and we beat out the pagans. So it's actually more of a diss to them. And so if you got a bunch of people rubbing crystals and stuff like that and pretending to be pagans and playing cosplay, cosplay occultists today, it doesn't really make All Saints Day evil or anything. They don't get dibs on days. So I mean, now that being said, there's a lot of stuff like a modesty and like creepy stuff that goes on in Halloween that I'm not about, I think are just not good to glorify. I think a lot of the horror stuff isn't good to glorify anyway, so we don't make it a part of our family tradition. We do more mild things at church and stuff like that, and we let them dress up as superheroes. But if they come trying to dress like a serial killer or something, there's gonna be a hard no from us. So I mean, I don't think it's outright evil. I'm not legalistic about it. I lean more into the All Saints Day and All Hallows Eve than I do the cosplaying witches.
Today we're going through Genesis 4 through 9. It's going to be covering Cain and Abel, the lineage to Noah, and the flood.
There's a lot of stuff you could get into in these chapters. So I think one of the best ways to start it, I mean, you know, we know where we're starting, we know where we left off. First, we're going to start with prayer, Psalm 19:14, which is let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be always acceptable and pleasing in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen.
Amen.
And so that'll take us. We're going to get into our scripture reading. We're going to punt it over, but we're going to start off coming from when Adam and Eve were dropped out of the garden and kept out by the cherubim and the flaming sword. We're going to start off with the story of their kids, what happened after they left. So let's get into the reading.
Chapter 4, Cain and Abel. Now Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And again she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. The Lord said to Cain, Why are you angry, and why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. Cain spoke to Abel his brother, and when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, Where is Abel your brother? He said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? And the Lord said, What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. And now you're cursed from the ground, which has opened up its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. Cain said to the Lord, My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you have driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. Then the Lord said to him, Not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest any who found him should attack him. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. When he built a city, he called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad fathered Mehujael, and Mehujael fathered Methushael, and Methushael fathered Lamech. And Lamech took 2 wives. The name of one was Ada, and the name of the other Zillah. Ada bore Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who play the lyre and pipe. Zillah also bore Tubal-Cain. He was the forger of all instruments of bronze and iron. The sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice. You wives of Lamech, listen to what I say. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain's revenge is sevenfold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and called his name Seth. For she said, God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him. To Seth also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. At that time people began to call upon the name of the Lord. Chapter 5. Adam's descendants to Noah. This is the book of the generations of Adam. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. Male and female he created them, and he blessed them and named them man when they were created. When Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness, after his image, and named him Seth. The days of Adam after he fathered Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. When Seth had lived 105 years, he fathered Enosh. Seth lived after he fathered Enosh 807 years, and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. When Enosh had lived 90 years, he fathered Kenan. Enosh lived after he fathered Kenan 815 years, and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Enosh were 905 years, and he died. When Kenan had lived 70 years, he fathered Mahalalel. Kenan lived after he fathered Mahalalel 840 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Kenan were 910 years, and he died. When Mahalalel had lived 65 years, he fathered Jared. Mahalalel lived after he fathered Jared 830 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Mahalalel were 895 years, and he died. When Jared had lived 162 years, he fathered Enoch. Jared lived after he fathered Enoch 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he fathered Methuselah. Enoch walked with God after he fathered Methuselah 300 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. When Methuselah had lived 187 years, he fathered Lamech. Methuselah lived after he fathered Lamech 782 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. When Lamech had lived 182 years, he fathered a son and called his name Noah, saying, Out of the ground that the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands. Lamech lived after he fathered Noah 595 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. After Noah was 500 years old, Noah fathered Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Chapter 6. Increasing corruption on earth. When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Noah and the flood. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. And Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, and all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark, and cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you are to make it. The length of the ark 300 cubits, its breadth 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. Make a roof for the ark, and finish it to a cubit above, and set the door of the ark on its side. Make it with lower, second, and third decks. For behold, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life under heaven. Everything that is on the earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female, of the birds according to their kinds, and of the animals according to their kinds, of every creeping thing of the ground according to its kind. 2 of every sort shall come into you to keep them alive. Also take with you every sort of food that is eaten, and store it up. It shall serve as food for you and for them. Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. Chapter 7. Then the Lord said to Noah, Go into the ark, you and all your household, for I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. Take with you 7 pairs of all clean animals, the male and his mate, and a pair of the animals that are not clean, the male and his mate, and 7 pairs of the birds of the heavens also, male and female, to keep their offspring alive on the face of all the earth. For in 7 days I will send rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and every living thing that I have made I will blot out from the face of the ground. And Noah did all that the Lord had commanded him. Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters came upon the earth. And Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives went with him into the ark to escape the waters of the flood, of clean animals and of animals that are not clean, and of birds and of everything that creeps on the ground. 2 and 2, male and female, went into the ark with Noah, as God had commanded Noah. And after 7 days the waters of the flood came upon the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened, and rain fell upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On the very same day Noah and his sons, Shem and Ham and Japheth, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with them entered the ark, they and every beast according to its kind, and all the livestock according to their kinds, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth according to its kind, and every bird according to its kind, every winged creature. They went into the ark with Noah, 2 and 2 of all flesh, in which there was the breath of life. And those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. The flood continued 40 days on the earth. The waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the face of the waters. And the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. The waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep, and all flesh died that moved on the earth. Birds, livestock, beasts, all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all mankind. Everything on the dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. He blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those who were with him in the ark, and the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. Chapter 8. The flood subsides. But God remembered Noah, and all the beasts, and all the livestock that were with him in the ark. And God made a wind blow over the earth, and the waters subsided. The fountains of the deep and the windows of the heavens were closed. The rain from the heavens was restrained, and the waters receded from the earth continually. At the end of 150 days, the waters had abated. And in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark came to rest on the mountain of Ararat. And the waters continued to abate until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the 1st day of the month, the tops of the mountains were seen. At the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made, and sent forth a raven. It went to and fro until the waters were dried up from the earth. Then he sent forth a dove from him, to see if the waters had subsided from the face of the ground. But the dove found no place to set her foot, and she returned to him to the ark, for the waters were still on the face of the whole earth. So he put out his hand and took her and brought her into the ark with him. He waited another 7 days, and again he sent forth the dove out of the ark. And the dove came back to him in the evening, and behold, in her mouth was a freshly plucked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the waters had subsided from the earth. Then he waited another 7 days and sent forth the dove, and she did not return to him any more. In the 601st year, in the 1st month, the 1st day of the month, the waters were dried from the earth, and Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. In the 2nd month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth had dried out. Then God said to Noah, "Go out from the ark, you and your wife, and your sons wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing that is with you of all flesh, birds and animals, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, that they may swarm on the earth, and be fruitful, and multiply on the earth." So Noah went out, and his sons and his wife, and his sons' wives with him. Every beast, every creeping thing, and every bird, everything that moves on the earth went out by families from the ark, God's covenant with Noah. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and took some of every clean animal and some of every clean bird, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And when the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, the Lord said in his heart, "I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease.
Welcome back. We are going to talk Cain and Abel, the lovely kids of Adam and Eve.
What's the thoughts? I mean, Cain and Abel, there's so much there. This one of the cool things with Cain and Abel. Well, first we've got out of nowhere, straight out the gate, we've got a sacrifice going on. Abel's sacrificing an animal, and you're like, whoa, all right, sacrifices are a thing. And then it describes a little bit about Cain and Abel, the different kind of people they are. And I kind of want to make a distinction here. There's nothing wrong with Cain offering up fruits
Right. That was one
and
of my
vegetables,
things.
stuff that came from the ground. That wasn't his offering was not rejected because it was fruits and veggies. Paul actually writes about this later and clarifies that it's actually because of Cain's heart. Something was going on in his heart, whether he wasn't being genuine, he wasn't giving honestly from what his best was, whatever it was. Cain was not on the level in the way he was given. It wasn't necessarily just because he was given fruits and veggies that God was like, I don't need that. I want the fat offerings. Because later on, when offerings are described for the Hebrew people, there are grain offerings, like there are free will offerings and everything like that. So Cain was it was valid. So what was going on with Cain was something in his heart. He wasn't on the level even before Abel jumped in.
Who did the offering first? Or does it even say? Was like Abel doing it first, and the Cain's like, well, here, I guess I should do this too.
In Genesis 4:3, it says, "In course of time Cain brought to the Lord an offering of fruit of the ground." So Cain brought it first, and then it says, "And Abel also brought of his firstborn of his flock and their fat portions." So it could be that they're bringing it at the same time. It's not very, it could just be both of them doing it. Like maybe the older brother saw the younger brother, or whatever way it worked out. They saw each other doing it, and they both thought it would be a good idea. Um, but sacrifices go all the way back to the first kids out of the garden. So that's how old sacrifices are. And I do want to point something out here, which is going to be really cool. We're going to touch back on it later when we get into Leviticus and Deuteronomy when the sacrifices start getting real heavy. One of the things we need to clarify right now, people get weirded out by sacrifices.
Understandably so.
All right. Yeah, people are like, sacrificing animals just seems kind of weird. But if I were to ask you, where were the first sacrifices in the Bible? Some people say Leviticus. That's when God institutes sacrifices. Some people are like, well, no, Abram made a sacrifice or Noah made a sacrifice. Well, if I asked you, what is the first sacrifice in the Bible? Where did it start?
This is gonna be a trick question because I would say Cain and Abel, but
Right. So no, actually, the first person to make a sacrifice is God. It's where the meaning of sacrifice come from. It's where the origin and the whole symbolism of sacrifice comes from God. If you read back one chapter ago, when they sinned, it says that God made them a garment out of animal skins when they sinned. So God actually killed animals. This is the first death in the Bible, and it was Adam and Eve were the stewards of these poor innocent animals, and then their sin, their shame, what they brought into the world needed to be covered by something. It needed to be answered and atoned for, and so the symbolism here is super rich. It shows that one, sin brings death, and you're like, well, that's not fair. God killed it. Those animals didn't have to die. But the point here is it needs to be answered. The sin needs to be answered for. And so what happens is Adam and Eve sinned. God kills these animals and covers their sin and their shame with the skins of these animals, the first clothing to cover themselves. And so every future sacrifice for sin is an echo back to the first sin ever committed in the garden, where God had to cover it for them. God had to atone for their sins and had to cover up what they did. So he was fixing their mistakes and covering their shame. And so from that point on, when we look back, what is the meaning of sacrifice kind of at its base root is to remind the not sacrificee, they're dead. The
What?
sacrificer, sorry, the sacrifice, the sacrificer, the people who are sacrificing. I don't want to get a little ahead because there's more symbolism when we get into Leviticus and Deuteronomy. I know people don't think there is because those are the boring books, air quotes. There's a lot of really cool stuff that goes on in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, but there's more symbolism later that hammers home this point that when people are meant to see the dying innocent creature that is dying because of their sins, And it's what it's meant to remind all of humans is, even if you don't see the end of your sin being death, this sacrifice is to remind you that all sin leads to death in the world. A world full of sin equals death. The world will die. And so this is a way of keeping that at the forefront of people's mind that shows people their guilt. Literally, Adam and Eve are not only covering their nakedness with the life of an innocent animal, but they're also constantly reminded of their sin. Not in like a guilt trip shaming way, but in like a perspective.
God's the first one to sacrifice, then Cain and Abel, and then Cain gets salty at Abel because God favors his sacrifice more and decides, hey, not anymore, buddy.
Yeah, this is cool because this is the first time in the Bible that somebody
Commits murder.
well, yeah, definitely. It's the first time in the outside of the garden that God is, speaking directly to somebody, in the first person. And one of the crazy things here is Cain. It says that Cain was very angry and his face fell, and the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? And why is your face fallen?" And then he gives him like a rhetorical question here. If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. What it's painting the sin as is like a crouching predator waiting to leap on him, wanting to control and to devour him. And so, and later on that tracks with it says the devil is like a roaring lion, like a roaming lion, looks searching for whom he may devour. So right here, God's saying, look, if you do the right thing, I'm going to accept you. You're going to be accepted if you do the right thing. So God's saying, like, look, the blame is on you here. It's not on Abel. So he's trying to set him straight. And then he tells him beforehand, like, look, you have a free will decision here, Cain. I know it's welling up in your heart. I know that I'm paraphrasing. This isn't what he says, but this is what's kind of being inferred. Sin is crouching at your door and it wants to take over, leading to the sin. You must rule it. So he's saying, you have the ability. I'm telling you now, you have the ability to control this crouching monster, this sin at your door.
Right.
Spoiler, he doesn't.
So that's like one of the first lines I've noticed that you could actually like put into use for like your day-to-day life.
For sure. That's super instructive. Well, it tells us about our free will. God's saying you have a choice to do evil or good. You're not helpless. And right here, God is directly stepping in and saying, like, don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
But later, people have the law. So the Hebrews have the law telling them what they ought not to do. So, like, thou shalt not murder. And people who are not Hebrew and do not have the law, people outside, the pagan people, all have a conscience given by God. Romans tells us this later. But it's saying that God leaves everybody with no excuse. Everybody knows deep down in themselves that they have the decision to choose good or evil. And this is where God is stepping in. And later, we as Christians have the Holy Spirit. So it's even more than conscience, it's even more than a law. God says it's a law that's written on our hearts. So we know in a deeper way what good is and how to choose good and how we're led to choose good. And so this is kind of parallel, like you're saying. So for anybody listening, occasionally I'm going to quote people like church fathers or pastors or saints in the church. And the reason I'm going to do this, okay, so there might be people who are Protestant who are like, ew, what are you doing? Like, why are you quoting these people? Other people are going to get why I'm quoting them, but my reason for appealing to these people, there are people within the first 100 years of the apostles who were very, very close to the time the Bible was written, and so their commentary I think is very valuable for us to think about because it was held by a unified church. It was held by you know, the majority of the Christian world looked to each other at this time. And so that's where we have some of these early theologians and these early scholars of the Bible that were only, their grandparents could have been Paul. So they're pretty close to the writing of the Bible. So they're not, it's not scripture, but I think it's good. It's a good reference anyway. So I want to reference them every now and then because one of the other things I want to point out when we're doing Bible studies is usually if you come up with interpretations or you're trying to discern what the Bible means, it's really good to try to look back into history and see if the church, the universal Christian church throughout human history have had this as something they thought about of a way interpreting a passage. Because chances are if in 2,000 years, nobody's ever come up with the interpretation that you have for a passage of the Bible, there's a good chance you're not right. There's a good chance you didn't just stumble across the new revelation. There's a better chance you're a heretic. So it's better to look at all of Christian history and try to figure out if this is like a cultish way of interpreting the Bible that I'm coming up with. And so every once in a while I just check with church history to make sure we're not going too far off the rails. And talking about this scene specifically, St. Augustine in his writing of City of God, he was talking about the nature of Cain's sin. He was saying that it's important to note that the crime of fratricide that was committed was not in sudden anger, but as a deliberate decision arising from envy. Cain's heart was twisted and having succumbed to hatred rather than love for his brother. So he's pointing out, St. Augustine's pointing out that like this wasn't like, oh, I'm so mad, and he attacks them. This was a contemplated, thoughtful murder. And the contemplation is where God stepped in to try to intervene and stop. So this shows Cain's will opposed to God. It's pretty crazy. And so, like, one of the things that Cain says, he's like, I love that Cain. I don't love it. This is actually really true. Cain, Abel's a real guy. We're gonna meet him one day. And the thing here that he said, just the line. This line is always really sad here. After he says, "Sin is crouching at your door; its desires contrary to you, trying to roll over you." Cain spoke to his brother Abel, and when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother?" He said, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" The answer to that question, for anybody, this is parallel to the Good Samaritan. When people say, "Jesus, who is my neighbor?" The answer is everybody is your neighbor. And the answer here, am I my brother's keeper? The answer is yes, you are in fact your brother's keeper. You are supposed to be your brother's keeper. That's the point of this. Like that's one of the things that's wrong. I mean, aside from him killing his brother, that's the other wrong mentality to have. Yes, you are your brother's keeper. You're meant to take care of your siblings, your family, your neighbor. And the Lord said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth." And Cain said, "My punishment is greater than I can bear." First off, the idea that the earth is opening its mouth to devour his dust again, that's kind of goes back to what we were talking about, the devil ready to consume the dead of the world. And he's saying, like, you love the ground and now it's not going to yield fruit to you. So like this passion of yours, this love of yours is going to now be a curse. It's going to be a burden to you.
Right. So you said it was a passion or a blessing, but like, was it more of a necessity? Because they're not in the garden anymore. So what do they eat?
Well, it was. So they do need to work the fields. They do need to work the fields. But yeah, but Cain loved working. Like that was what Cain did. Abel was a shepherd. He tended to sheep and stuff, and this is what he did. And God is telling him now, like, now it's not going to yield its fruit to you like it used to. So now this thing that was good for you is going to need to be bad. And Cain immediately starts to go into despair. He's like, not only is this too much, this is just too much for me to bear. I can't handle this. But furthermore, after this, people are going to hate me so much. I'm paraphrasing here. People are going to hate me so much, they're going to kill me if they see me. They're going to say that's Cain, and boom, he's dead. And God places the mark of Cain on Cain. And the mark of Cain is not this leprosy saying like he's the bad guy here, everybody get Cain, or Cain's the evil murderer. The mark is actually to let people in the world know, don't kill this guy. And God says, or I'll avenge Cain sevenfold. So like God actually gives him mercy and grace in this state and says, I'm going to actually protect you. So even in this moment of Cain murdering his brother, God has mercy on him. So like we see that right away that God could have just struck Cain down, an eye for an eye. But instead, his life got harder But there's something to be said about that. If you murder somebody, your life is going to be harder anyway. Like that's what happens when you murder people. There's consequences and repercussions. And Cain was rightfully so. Like usually when people murder people, you die for it. Whether it be the government or people taking vengeance on you, and God gave him mercy and protected him from that.
Is there any sort of sign or saying in the Bible later on that says like what the mark of Cain is? Or is it just like, because like if people saw him, they would know like, hey, that's Cain, don't touch him.
We don't know. I've heard scholars say wild things like it was, a mark on his forehead. I've heard people say it was horns, animalistic horns. I've heard people say it was a dog for some reason, like a dog traveled with him, an unclean animal, so people would stay away from him. We don't really, the Bible doesn't tell you. That's all super nerdy scholar stuff that they don't really know either. They're just guessing, basically. Yeah, they're speculating, maybe with like good mild evidence, but they don't really know.
I got you. So after that, we get to some lineage.
Yeah. Well, one thing I do want to point out really quickly is that Cain, because this is pretty significant, because soon we're going to start getting to what's going on in the world, and I think it's important to talk about what happened with Cain and his family. It talks about that Cain was driven out. He went away from the presence of the Lord and settled into the land of Nod. That's east of Eden. So he went and dwelled in an entirely new country, and he had a wife, and they conceived and bore Enoch. And they built a city. And so what's crazy here, and he named the city after his son. But what's crazy here is it'll continue from this point on to explain a genealogy, like you're about to say. And it explains this one's child, and he begat him, he begat him. But one of the things that's inferred here is there is a city built up. So what's crazy here is this is another person in church history called Saint Cyril of Alexandria, and he said that the murder of Abel shows how rapid sin grows within humanity right after the garden. And as the sin of evil that was sown in Adam's disobedience, it started to bear fruit in Cain's violence. So the imagery I talked about last time, that humans were meant to cultivate and spread a culture and spread the kingdom of heaven from the garden all around the world. Well, instead, what we're getting is the fruit that's being bore. This thing that's coming from it is Cain is a murderer. A murderer goes off into a different place, and instead of spreading the kingdom of heaven, he builds a city. And then as we read on, it gives us details of what this city's culture is like. So there's some things, like it mentions in the genealogy, it starts to mention that instruments of bronze and iron start to come from this city and from his children. And it starts to mention things like instruments, like musical instruments and tools and metallurgy and crafting and things like this were built in this city. And so, we think, okay, no big deal. That's cool. That's a culture. Like music is in culture, weapons and iron and bronze material is just, that's a part of cultures. That's normal. But we start to get an idea of what these things are being used for. And instead of, as we get on a little further here and we start to see how south the world goes, this city and this culture spread by Cain around the world at this time, they start using it for bad things. They start using it for pagan worship. They start using it as weapons to kill each other. They start using the culture that comes from this fallen kingdom, this garden that's being spread of evil. They use it for bad stuff like child sacrifice and things. And so it mentions Lamech is one of Cain's descendants, and he actually brags about being more evil than Cain. He starts saying that he would bring vengeance down if anybody strikes. He says, somebody struck me and I killed him for striking me. And he starts to boast about gathering and acquiring women as servant wives or slaves or whatever, however you want to take it. But he boasts about gathering women. He boasts about being more wicked than Cain. And so this is the culture that's coming from Cain's people. So this shows that the kingdom of heaven spreading from the garden is not happening. Something else is spreading from these people. So the culture that's emerging from Cain's people that are building cities and building a culture of everything around the world it's evil. It's just it's starting a downward spiral, and then it jumps back over to Adam having a new son named Seth with his wife. And so, for she said, God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him. It says, Seth bore a son, and his name was Enosh. And at the time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. So you've got a contrast here. Seth's kids, the people that are coming from their Adam and Eve's next children, are starting to call upon the name of the Lord instead of turning to what the world is doing. The world is going in a downward spiral, and you've got this one bloodline of people who are calling out to God. They're doing the right thing. And that brings us to the genealogies that lead to Noah.
Yeah, this person had this son. This son lived for X amount of years, died. They gave birth to this son, X, Y, and Z. But then when it gets to Enoch, it says Enoch walked faithfully with God. Then he was no more because God took him away.
Yep. No need to explain anything there. We're all on the same page. No need to explain anything about that. He doesn't tell us. He found favor with God, something he did, the way he lived with God, the connection he had with God. God had his own purposes for him, for sure. When it says somebody walked with God, it usually means they walk like within the will of God, the things that God wants them to do. But we are told later in the New Testament that Enoch was a prophet. He was prophesying to the people in the world. So he was a prophet calling out to, it doesn't say it here, but it says in the New Testament that he was calling out to these nations, this downward spiraling world that was going on. God wasn't just like super quiet and let them do whatever they want. They had warnings, they had things going on. And Enoch was mentioned in the New Testament as being a prophet, prophesying in this time. And there's I'm sure this will come up if anyone's ever been on YouTube studying Christian stuff, the Book of Enoch, which was not written by Enoch. It was written in the 2nd century BCE, around that time. Um, we're not going to get into the Second Temple period and all that stuff. It's too much right now. But basically, you can think of it as a fan fiction by folklore stories about Enoch. Some people want to believe the whole story is super true about Enoch having visions, and it's a whole story explaining Enoch's journey in Genesis that led up to him being taken away by God. Um, it's not in the Bible. It's not scripture. It was a folklore style oral tradition by the Jewish people, around 200 years before Jesus came. And it's quoted a couple times. The book of Enoch is actually quoted a couple times in the New Testament by apostles. So this is not to say the entire book of Enoch should be in the Bible or it's scripture. It's saying that at least a couple things in the book of Enoch happen to be true that the apostles quoted. So that's it. So we don't, that we're not going to get into Enoch any more than that. But yeah, at least a couple things were true in the book of Enoch, the folklore stories, and then we know he was a prophet.
Yeah, I have on here Genesis 6, 1 through 2. It says, when human beings began to increase in number on the earth and daughters were born to them, then the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be, 120 years. This Then it says, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. When the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them, they were the heroes of old, men of renown.
Yeah, we don't know. It doesn't. That's one of those times the Bible doesn't tell us a whole lot about something weird. And then people's ages. People were old. This is something that's going to stand out. People is how old people were. Obviously, um, there's there's a there is the hyper literal translation of just like they were 900 years old, and that's probably true. And then there are elaborate ways I'm not going to get into. People have thought maybe it's symbolic of things, and they weren't quite that old. They could have been really old, but maybe not. Methuselah's 969 years old. Um, if God wanted to keep people alive that long before the flood, that was up to him. So Dang it. We got to talk. Yeah. So first we come right out of Enoch being abducted and taken up by God, which is a super weird passage, and then we jump right into another super weird passage. One thing I will say, one interpretation of the my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh, and his days shall be 120 years. So one, I think people's common interpretation of that is that the regular lifespan after this will be 120 years old. That's kind of intuitive because, like, yeah, people don't live past 120 years old. Like, so it's like, oh, that makes sense. Well, one, it's contradictory. I mean, that might be it. That might be what it's trying to say. But that's kind of contradictory because after this, several people live to be way older than 120 after the flood. So that doesn't quite work. And secondly, the most common interpretation of this from church history and scholars is actually that God is saying that, like, my spirit, the breath of life, the breath that's in their lungs, will not sustain them for longer, won't be with them. It'll be with them for another 120 years. One of the more popular interpretations of this is that actually God was giving them a grace period of 120 years to repent before he flooded the earth. That's kind of what I lean into because people live past 120 after this. So I think it's probably God. That's a grace period. Like with Cain, when he's like, I'll give you a mark, even though you murdered people. God's saying everybody is wicked right now, but I'm going to give them 120 years. I'll give them a chance. Yeah, to figure it out, to listen to me. And then we get into the Nephilim or the giants. Okay, so man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, and the sons of God that saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took them as their wives as they chose. And the Lord said, "Yeah, I'm going to flood the earth. They only have a limited number of time." And then it continues, the Nephilim, also known as the men of renown, the mighty men, or the giants, were on the earth in those days and afterward. When the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them, they were the mighty men of old and of renown. There are two interpretations of what's going on here. This is a super weird passage. And people haven't really known what to deal with it for a long time. There are two ways of looking at it. Okay. There is the way, so sons of God exclusively throughout the Bible means angels. The sons of God are angels. That's synonymous. The hosts of heaven, the sons of God. That, like, if you were to look at a concordance and find sons of God, it's angels, like, unanimously. So it's hard to get around the fact that it's talking about angels seeing women and they desired them for some reason. So there are YouTube clickbait channels that will tell you that they actually, viewer discretion here, I'll be as gentle as possible. They made little Nephilim giant demi angel baby monster hybrids that started plaguing the world, and like clickbaity YouTube channels were like, look, we found giant bones. Look, this proves Nephilim. And okay, so one thing I want to squash here is that angels do not have human DNA. Angels don't have bodies, and angels don't have the reproductive contribution to make people pregnant. So something else is going on here. And I'm going to mention it really quickly. In ancient times, with pagan cultures, with Mesopotamian cults and stuff, there were fertility temples where, again, I'm going to be gentle, there were women dedicated as priestess kind of people who would dedicate their wombs up to pagan deities. And they would say, I'm dedicating, I would come here, I'd give you a sacrifice. Can you give me a baby? I'll sacrifice stuff and, give me fertility. That's what the idea of fertility goddesses or fertility cults and things like this. And there were also other kind of rituals going on in Near Eastern religions about fertility rites and temple worship. That involved, sounds so strange, but sacred prostitution or ritual sex acts where a king would come and they would invite the spirit, kind of like inviting a spirit to indwell an idol, like a pagan idol. They would invite it to indwell the woman. And a king or a king who wanted to be a god or exalt himself would basically procreate with a woman, and he would dedicate the child to a divine nature to say, "Hey, make this child of the gods." You know, think like Hercules or people, demigods, or Theseus in the Bible, or not in the Bible, yeah, like Theseus in Greek mythology. They would say, have a deity or a spirit involved in the act of a king making a baby with these sacred, air quotes here, sacred prostitutes. And what wasn't happening was angels were not actually producing the necessary components to make a physical baby because they're not human, they don't have the reproductive organs. More than likely what happened, and this is what scholars talk about, these ritual acts would have been people inviting gods, but they didn't know it would have been demonic possession into one or both of the people involved in the act, and then they would then consecrate the baby to be this warrior, think Greek demigod king that was in line with the gods of the temple, and he would then go out and commit acts
Right.
in the name of that god or the gods that birthed him. So rather than an actual giant, because a giant could just mean giant in not in actual stature, but in renown and fame. And so really what we're getting here is children that were conceived through a deeply dark and demonic pagan sexual act involved in temples and kings with prostitutes dedicated to demons and gods. And the children that came from it would be people like Lamech, who were boasting about doing evil, heinous things because the culture they were raised in and the the lore around their birth would have been that you're a chosen vessel for these spiritual deities or whatever. But in reality, these people would then be called Nephilim, or children of fallen angels. So, and there could be spiritual stuff going on. They could be possessed. Later in the New Testament, we have legion, or people who are possessed, like when the Pharisees, jumping ahead for everyone here, but there are people in the New Testament who are possessed and they exhibit strength enough to break iron chains off of their wrists and savage and brutalize entire groups of Pharisees trying to perform an exorcism over them. This is a single man with strength like this. So if you can imagine a willingly demon possessed man who then becomes a warrior on the battlefield and starts slaying people, he would start to become known as this warrior of old, this mighty hero or whatever. Hero here doesn't mean noble, it just means legendary person. So you could see somebody who is willingly demon possessed slaughtering people in war or heinous acts, making a name for themselves. And so this would play into what an evil person would want to get these things, like like Lamech acquiring wives for himself or murdering people to boast about it. And demons are winning out on this because they're like, our goal was to make humans the dust of dust of the earth and consume them again. We're getting back at humans, so this is a win-win for everyone involved. The people think they're winning, but they're being led astray by these cults and demons and stuff. Now, that would be the grounded interpretation of what a Nephilim or a giant is. Okay, a demonic ritual conceived baby who is then dedicated to a demon or a deity. Um, I'm not gonna humor. I'm not. I'm not gonna humor the idea that maybe there were, okay, whatever, but theologically, it doesn't make sense to say that there were actual half-breed angel people rocking the earth. That doesn't make any sense. Then there is another interpretation, which is much more grounded. It's saying that the sons of God and the daughters of man and all of this stuff, that there are ways of trying to say that this was the bloodline of Seth, who are the righteous people, and the bloodline of Cain, who were the unrighteous. And the bloodline of Cain was coming in trying to intermingle with the righteous people from Seth, right?
Mm.
Yeah, so that was the other interpretation. It's called the Sethite view. This is much more materialistic, like, I'm not gonna say rational. I think the other way is probably exactly what it was. I think it was pagan rich sexual acts, inviting demons in. I think that's what it was. But this is the Sethite view. I am going to mention two different things here. So we're going to talk about Saint Augustine in City of God. He writes, that the sons of God who intermarried with the daughters of men symbolize the mingling of the faithful and the unfaithful, leading to the corruption and moral decline of humans further. So that was he was actually so St. Augustine was an outlier here. He was not, that was more of a novel idea. Jewish people saw it the other way. Jewish people leading up to him saw it as just straight up angels. They're like, yeah, there's no way around it. Sons of God means angels. So, however you parse that out, that the Jewish people thought that, and other church fathers thought as well that it was what I just mentioned a second ago. So we have Saint Justin Martyr, who existed in the 2nd century, interprets specifically what we just talked about. The sons of Angel were fallen angels who further rebelled again by not only instigating humans to build weapons to murder each other and do all kinds of bad stuff and further that culture of Cain along farther down the road of destruction, but then do what I just said. And he writes in one of his writings that the angels transgressed this appointment and were captivated by the love of women and begat children who are those that are called demons. So that was his view of it. So his view was that he had an even further view. He had the view that the ones who were conceived in these ritual acts and these heroes of old that died, their spirits continued to wander the earth and would be known as demons who could possess people in later times. So he took it further. He was like, that's where we get some of the demons in the New Testament. So
That kind of makes sense.
right, and so that was not he wasn't alone in that view. The Book of Enoch makes that clear too. The Book of Enoch is again that folklore, that fan fiction written in 200 BC about Enoch and stuff.
Let's hear it in the comments. Is it canon?
Basically, all this to say, these are the two views. St. Augustine's view is more easy to palate. And then there's the view that you can still take a pretty moderate view and say it was scrump rituals in pagan temples to basically dedicate your baby to be possessed, and the baby would then become a hero later in life. And
Right.
then you could take it just a little further and say that those spirits then go to dwell in the world and don't find a resting place, but instead,
Still dwell.
yeah, and they're called demons later. St. Augustine was the guy who put forward I don't think he was the only one. He wasn't the only one, but he was a main one who put forward the Sethite view that it was just the righteous people and then the unrighteous were intermarrying to mix and mess up all the families. He's not dumb. This guy is a huge
Right.
figure in the church. So it's not. I'm not saying his view of this is wrong, but one of the other things later, the problem is just said, here's my problem with that view. Okay, it says that the giants or Nephilim were on the earth in those days and after, right?
Right.
Here's the problem. In a few minutes, not in a few minutes, in a few hundred years, we're going to learn that the earth is flooded. All of Cain's descendants are destroyed in the
Mhm.
flood, which just leaves the Sethites. It just leaves the other bloodline.
Right.
Where, after they repopulate the earth, does Goliath come from? Who is a Rephaim or a Nephilim? Where are these other giants? Because it mentions when they go into the promised land, when they go into Canaan, it says that there's giants there again. But Cain wasn't breeding anymore, so that doesn't work.
Right.
That again
Okay.
falls apart because Cain wasn't still alive; his descendants were dead. So yeah, it has its issues. Anyway, we've spent I think long enough on this. We're going to jump back into this later because Jude and Peter both mentioned the angels, but in the time of Noah, who did not stay in their proper dwelling places, but left and were then kept in chains of eternal darkness until the day of judgment. They just throw that in there like, yep, those angels who did that thing are waiting to this day to be punished by God for what they did in the time of Noah. So, whatever happened with angels in this time, God took it extremely seriously. It was a bad thing that angels did.
Well, it was so bad that he decided to flood the earth to get rid of everyone, except for Noah and his wife and his sons wives and the animals that were selected.
Yes. Right. Because it says that Noah found favor in God's eyes. And the one thing I want to say here is that it wasn't that Noah was just so good and sinless that God decided to spare him. It's that he was willing, he was obedient to God. So it's not that you're perfect, it's that you're willing to put your will below God's, and that was obedience and faith was what Noah had. That's why he found favor in the eyes of God. It wasn't because he was just perfect. It was because he was among the people who we just read about a minute ago who called out to the Lord. They sought God in this wicked land and this dying earth. They sought and cried out to God. And so Noah was heard. And one thing to back up what I just said, Saint John Chrysostom, a theologian, more of an Eastern theologian in the Christian church early on, he said that Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord, not because of the lack of his sin, but because of his willingness to live in obedience to God. He lived differently from the world around him and trusted in God's promises. So that was just, backing up what I just said a second ago.
And God speaks to him and tells him to build an ark, a massive ark that can hold all these animals, have all these rooms, all these cubics of space, and to sit in there until tells him to come out.
Yeah, the flood and the flooding of the earth. It's a sad story. It's a weird story to have in nursery rooms for sure.
This is I think the story that most people throw at Christians. Oh, God's such a loving God. Why did he flood the earth to kill all these people?
Right. Okay, well he is loving, so jot that down.
And then also how bad do these people on the earth have to be for God to be like, all right, let me start over?
Okay, so they were intermingling with fallen angels, demons, they were sacrificing their children, they were continuously wicked. And it got to the point where the Bible tells us clearly that it was down to one man in his family. It doesn't say necessarily his whole family was in the same position he was in as far as their obedience to God, but it simply says that him and his family were the last hope for the world. So it must have been pretty freaking bad for that to be the case. And it says, when it says that, it's a very sad scene. It says, "The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I've created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and the birds of heaven, for I am sorry that I've made them." But Noah found favor in the eyes of God. So one of the sad things here is that all of the creatures in the world that were put under our care, that we were meant to be their guardians and their leaders, are now going to be destroyed for humans' errors. So again, we're dragging all of creation down with us. And God is grieved by this. He doesn't want to do this. Um, Human will is opposed to him, and fallen angels' wills are opposed to him at this point, up to the point where it's only Noah left. To what you just mentioned a second ago, why would an all-loving God do this? Why, such and such and such? So one of the answers to that objection is one, anytime people die in the Bible as a result of God's actions and choices and punishments, the one who's responsible for their eternal sentence is God. Human life here is just a blip. It is a tiny, tiny, tiny piece of how long we'll exist in eternity. We don't know where people go when they die for sure. That's up to God alone, and that's up to his mercy. So if somebody's life is cut short early, whether it be a murder dies early or an innocent child dies early, the one who's responsible for their eternal destination, what will happen to them after the fact, is God. And he's somebody who can be trusted with it. Now, for the earth being flooded, that's a lot of people dying. That's a lot of deaths. So one of the things to note,
A lot of sacrifice.
yeah, a lot of sacrifice. One of the things here to know, would it have been better for God if this was going to be the trajectory? Say Noah's family died off. Would it have been good of God for him to let the earth go on for another 10,000 years in this state with people, women being taken by people like Lamech, children being sacrificed? Is that actually good? And it raises another question. It talks about sin leads to death. So say a 10,000 year, let's just throw out a number here. Let's say 10,000 years of this horrid, horrid life of humans leading to all of this death and chaos and misery eventually ends in humanity annihilating themselves, right? It's not too hard to imagine. We have nukes now. We can annihilate ourselves. So if an entire however much time goes by that humans torture and kill and murder innocents, and then they eventually just die. They annihilate themselves. Is it more merciful to cut and abruptly end and speed up that process rather than allowing it to carry on and drag on in a slow, sad death, and then restore it immediately after with a righteous family and give it another chance? So the people in that world were going to die. They were going to die from sickness, they were going to die from war, they were going to die from plague. God sped that up, yes. They were going to die from their choices. They were going to die, and eventually it was going to get to a boiling point, whether it's nuclear war or whatever it is, that they would all terminate themselves. They would drag God's created order back into uncreation, back into the abyss. They would pull it right back in with them, and God intervened. So, if his means of intervening are hard to swallow, the things that were going on with the people in that time, if you were to teleport back then and see what was going on, would have been even more hard to swallow. So if the question is all the people at this time die for the sake of God looks into the future and sees all of us alive today, sees the billions and billions of people that have existed since then, far more than it existed since the flood. And you couple that with the fact that he is responsible and it's his decision what happens to people after they die. We don't have the perspective. We don't have the necessary, like I said, when the flood came, or when Eve left the garden, or when he put the tree in the Garden of Eden, he saw everything through all human history. Part of the thing is he saw, if you're listening, he saw you. He didn't end the world. He didn't kill everybody. He let Noah save creation. He saved creation through Noah. He did that. If you are a Christian now, he personally knows you. And that wouldn't have happened without all the events leading up to now. Jesus wouldn't have had it happened the way it happened if God did not preserve the earth. It all has a greater meaning. And furthermore, later, we get passages saying that people who died in the Old Testament and people who were destroyed in the flood were preached to and approached by Jesus in the days when he was crucified before he rose from the dead. It says that Jesus descended into Sheol, the land of the dead, and preached to the spirits there.
They've just been chilling in Sheol for a while. They're like, okay, what are we doing here, guys?
Yeah, we don't know what people, which people that was. We don't know if that was everybody or if that was specifically the people who were innocent and died before and all of that. But the point here is that God's not accounting for everything.
So is Sheol still a thing, like praying for the dead?
I think we're maybe getting a little ahead of ourselves. Yeah, Sheol is the land of the dead. It's just where all the dead go before Christ comes. Sheol has two facets, two angles of it is Abraham's paradise or Abraham's bosom paradise. That's the place in Sheol that's not as bad. Presumably, this is where Jesus went to save these people. Which would have been the Old Testament people who had faith in God. This is the people who dwelled in Sheol. And then there's the other part of Sheol, which is still the land of the dead, a different place there that is not comfortable. It's burning, or it's whatever kind of metaphor, whatever kind of literal image you want to use to explain it. It's not comfortable. It's a bad place to be, and that's juxtaposition to paradise, or Abraham's bosom, which is where the Old Testament saints went. And then the other people, so like the people that like Lamech and people would have been the other part of Sheol. And so we usually just refer to what is Sheol now as hell, because it's where the bad people are, and the good people are in the presence. Not the good people, sorry. The people who have faith, the people who adhere to what God revealed to them, and who are believing in God's revelation and his gospel, are in the presence of Jesus, or in the presence of Christ now. Those who are not are in Sheol. It's not a comfortable place to be. But that's what we typically call Hades or hell or Gehenna or whatever. But realistically, the more hell-like place that we don't talk about is the lake of fire. That's the eternal state. That's the place where people, or the devil and his angels, dwell for eternity. That's the more hell-like place that we envision, I think. So Sheol, and then the lake of fire, 2 different places.
So Noah's on this ark for 40 days and 40 nights, and God completely floods the earth, killing everything.
Time out. And one more tangent. People always say that, that animals don't have a spirit or they don't have a soul. Um, I would affirm that in one way. They don't have the same reasoning, higher soul-like God image given capacity that humans have, but the Bible makes it very clear over and over that that animals do have spirits. They do have a breath of life in them. They are not just moving meat machines. There is a life present within the living things of the earth. That's not us. So I want to make that clear. The Old Testament does not say that animals do not have a spirit. They do. It's not the same as a human spirit, but
Gotcha. So all dogs do go to heaven.
hey, man, there are a lot of people in church history who do think animals are in heaven.
Yeah, so Noah's on the boat with his wife, his sons, his son's wife. God floods the earth for 40 days, 40 nights. It just raining, raining, raining. Everything dies.
Yeah, so presumably they're like bunkered down in this giant. The other thing is this boat is not a boat. Right, he didn't build like a keel. He didn't build the necessary thing to sail this. This thing is a glorified box that's waterproof. So it's literally and a crazy symbolism here that people talk about is the God's covenant is being carried in this container. God's law and his covenant is being carried in this ark. Later you have a different kind of ark. You have the Ark of the Covenant that carries God's covenant in it. And then even further later, people have equated Mary as carrying Jesus, carrying the final covenant in her. So it's like this image of this vessel containing the promise in it, and that's one of the ways people have talked about Noah's Ark. And people have said that the Ark is like the church, where salvation is keeping people safe from the flood of sin. Just the same way that Noah's family was saved. People who are in the church are saved from the corruption and the sin in the world, the death that comes with the sin in the world, the flood. Anything stand out?
I mean, not necessarily. I mean, there's numbers involved. So you got 40 days, 40 nights.
And so in Hebrew usage, the number 40 is usually designated with a period of trial and testing. So you think Jesus 40 days in the wilderness, surviving the wilderness, and then you think the Jewish people 40 years in the wilderness being tested. Well, here you have Noah 40 days and 40 nights in the ark. It's like a testing or trial period, and the people outside the flood are not passing the test.
Right. And another thing I never really thought about, because of course you hear this as, a little kid, and you're like, pairs of animals went on the boat, but actually multiple pairs.
If you mention dinosaurs, I'm gonna punch you in the nose.
No dinosaurs, but well, no, because then dinosaurs would still be around, wouldn't they? If they made it on the boat.
Wait,
Yeah.
that's why I said don't mention it.
But no, that they brought 7 pairs of clean animals, I think, and then what, 2 or 5 pairs of unclean. So it's like that's something I never
Mhm.
really noticed that.
Yeah, they were chowing down on those.
Which is also strange because
Right.
once they do get out, it says God gives the animals and everything to eat just as he let them eat the green plants before. He's allowing humans after the flood to eat animals just as they were eating plants prior to the flood.
When they do get off, they now have animals to breed and create livestock to start harvesting. So whether they were eating them on the ark, I don't really know, but I know that they would have then been set up to have a farm to harvest animals when they got off. They would have had livestock. So after the flood, they would be set up to have burgers.
Heck yeah.
The other thing I do want to point out that's kind of here. Two things I want to say is one, it mentions that the Lord opened forth the springs of the deep to assist in the flooding of the world. So springs from the bottom of the ocean rip forward and flood the earth along with the rain of 40 days and 40 nights. Job later on is given a vision of the world, seeing how great God is. God is revealing that, you know, God and Job in that story they're talking about the fountains of the deep waters and being a source of where of part of the ocean. Well, that used to be made fun of because people didn't think that's how we got our water necessarily. It was more of an understanding of glaciers and things like this. That was actually so. I want to point out here two cool little things. Hebrew people back in the day were not going very deep swimming down in the bottom of the ocean. They did not know for sure there were geysers down there unless it was revealed by God. And we didn't know that there were geysers like that at the bottom of the earth or at the bottom of the oceans until submarines got down there and said, "Hey, guys, there are geysers of water beneath the crust of the earth feeding the oceans." And Genesis talks about it here. A book that an oral tradition from thousands and thousands of years ago is like, "Hey, there's geysers at the bottom of the ocean." I just thought I'd point that out. It's pretty cool. The Bible got that right, even when we didn't know it. And then the second thing is that it says that animals, it explains a relationship, a further breaking of the relationship. It talks about animals would feel the dread of humans. So this is kind of a signifying thing, showing that we're getting farther from the Garden of Eden. People are eating burgers, people are chomping down on bacon, and animals are not yielding to humans in the same way they were in the garden. It's not the same kind of Edenic bliss that it was meant to be. It's now a fallen world even farther. Olive branch being brought by the dove. You guys have seen the symbol for peace, right? An olive branch is a symbol of peace, or a dove holding an olive branch. That's where this comes from. And I think even though we're going to stop at 8, I'm going to mention one thing that's kind of synonymous, or is synonymous with the flood and Noah, is the rainbow in the sky, right? The rainbow seems kind of weird.
Maybe these days.
My thought when I was younger was like, because I didn't really understand all this stuff. I was like, okay, it seems more like people are just looking up at a rainbow and they're saying like, oh, well, God did that, and it's a sign somehow. But one of the things that's missing in the Hebrew, it talks about God setting his bow in the clouds, right? The rainbow as a symbol of peace, that he would no longer. So when there was a symbol back then in war, when people would fight and nations and stuff, there was a symbolic gesture of hanging up one's bow. And what it was saying is, I'm no longer waging conquest, or I'm no longer fighting against this other nation. And so when God hangs his bow in the sky, what he's saying is, when people look up and see God's bow hanging in the sky, they know that he's not at war with them anymore. He's not bringing upon them this flood, because he promises never to flood them ever again. The world will never be flooded. Nothing will be destroyed in this way again. And as a symbol of that, he hangs his bow in the sky. And back in Mesopotamian cultures and Near Eastern cultures, a general hanging his bow up or putting the bow up was a symbol of peace. And that's where the rainbow comes from. And he says this is a covenant, he says, I've made with you. But he doesn't ask anything of people. He doesn't say, the deal is you do this and I'll put my bow in the sky. He says, even though you're going to be continually bent towards wicked, my bow will stay there. So he's saying, this is non-negotiable on my part. I'm just not going to flood the earth again like this. I'm not going to do this again. So that's a one-sided covenant there. And he has a promise in the sky for us. So when we see a rainbow, what it was a symbol of was that, in spite of the wickedness of man attempting to corrupt and drag the world back into chaos and uncreation, I, the Lord, will not take a drastic measure to put an end to all the evil again abruptly. So I will be patient and I will bear with you in spite of you putting sin in my face. I will still remain peaceful to you. That's the rainbow.
It's a good
It's a
thing
beautiful
he's
symbol.
patient, because he probably would have wiped us out again by now.
Yeah. I saw a meme one time. I don't know if you ever see the Pikachu face. That's the prize. Like, oh, like the surprise face. Is it atheist? Well, if God's real, why doesn't he put an end to all the evil and the death in the world? And then it showed the Pikachu face underwater. It said the flood. Like, he did. People don't like it. He did do that once, and people are still not okay with it. So they don't. He's like, all right, I'll end it. Checkmate. So yeah, and that takes us to 8. So 4 to 8. It's not bad.
So one thing I did want to ask you was, what can we take away from these stories in Genesis so far?
So one of the things I want to say is the Bible is not okay. It is and it isn't. So it's not going to the gym, but it's for your spirit. It is that, but it's not like I should get the spiritual stuff in order. So I'll do my Bible reading. That way I can get this stuff in check. Like you're kind of like burning calories or something. What the stories and what's going on in the Bible is it is everything in the world, all of creation, everything in existence is given and reveal the meaning of all of it is revealed in the Bible. It gives us the reason for everything. So we can look out into space with science and see the stars, and we can see maybe how stars form. But that doesn't tell us why they were formed. It doesn't tell us any reason behind anything. The Bible is the reason behind everything. It's the revelation to all of humans as to what God's story is in creation. And then the New Testament, the gospel and the New Testament specifically is an invitation to have a direct relationship with the one who wrote existence. It's actually a door into being connected to the one who did everything, the one who's writing the story of the world and creation. It's a way of finding your place in that story and finding out that you are a part of what God is writing for history. You're one of the people that are involved. You're not just someone looking back at the Bible for like a self-help or a TED talk. You're reading the Bible to understand who you are and what your purpose is, and then to connect to the one who's giving you that meaning. And so that's like the best way to approach the Bible, I would say. So you can get practical advice out of it. So we can learn I probably shouldn't kill people. I probably shouldn't covet my neighbor's wife. Probably shouldn't steal their cattle. Like those are all good lessons. And most governments in the Western world have taken those to heart, and that's one of the things they build their countries on. At least initially, we've pretty much thrown that out the window nowadays. But initially, that's people are like, okay, there's good morals we can get from it. So some of the good morals, specifically, we look at the wickedness of the world. What stands out to me is Noah, in spite of the world around him and the people in his bloodline, in spite of the world around them, creating an entire culture of people and even art and creation and maybe beautiful things like a city, and people making names for themselves, becoming very famous, Lamech's people. In spite of all of that, the hearts of Noah and his family and the people that came before him of that bloodline called out to God because they saw all of this and they rejected it. They decided that there is a meaning behind creation that is not tied to this fallen culture, this culture built on the legacy of Cain and the legacy of sin that grew from Adam's seeds of disobedience. So stand against the world if the world is against God. I think of Saint Athanasius, I believe it's Saint Athanasius. Saint Athanasius's quote when he says, "If the world is against the truth, then I am against the world." And that's what sticks out to me in the story of Noah and the story of this bloodline that left the Garden of Eden, and in spite of the world around them leading to an inevitable floody, watery, muddy end, they decided that they were going to call on the name of God. And they were saved because the Bible tells us later, those who call on the name of the Lord will be saved. And so that's one of the key messages. And also, the other thing I take from it is that no matter how overwhelming the sin that you feel like you want to do, I'm looking at Cain here. No matter how much it feels like it's crouching at your door and it's going to take over you, you must rule over it. God gave you the free will. And as a Christian, he gives you the Holy Spirit to pray and to look to our example in Christ to rule over the sin and take those thoughts captive. So that's what I get.
That's weird. I got none of that.
Oh, okay, cool.
So you're wrong. No, that's awesome. It's good to hear like your insight on all this. It's pretty wild. Pretty wild how little you know.
I don't know much. I'm literally just a nerd, and all the good stuff I get, any kind of insight I have is coming from A, the Holy Spirit, and B, the Bible. I'm plagiarizing the Bible.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can do that.
Yeah, I think it's okay. I think it's the point. By any means, we did not cover everything in those chapters. There's tons left, and you guys should dive into it and read it or listen to it yourselves. There's a lot of stuff, and we'll be coming back here, I'm sure, talking about a lot of this eventually. We are neither teachers nor pastors nor priests. So if you have one of those that you look to, get information and learn from them as well. And we are going to close with a prayer because I think that's a good idea. 2 Corinthians 13:11. This is Paul writing to the Corinthians and advising them on a way and a position to stay in. And that would be, finally, brethren, farewell. Become complete and be of good comfort. Be of one mind and live in peace. And the God of love and peace will be with you. Amen.
Amen. That is a wrap on episode 2 of the Faith XP podcast. We covered Genesis 4 through 8. And like Caleb said, there's so much more to dive into. We're just scratching the surface. I did want to shout out our good friend Leo. He just started a Vitals and Virtues podcast. The new podcast coming that focuses on the pursuit of a virtuous life from the spin of a healthcare provider, taking some classical wisdom from the saints and philosophers and trying to condense it into a practical application you can take with you on your way into your shift. He'll be interviewing healthcare professionals from all sorts of specialties and educational levels. So stay tuned for that. I'm sure that'll be on Spotify and YouTube as well. Leo, you can send us that check whenever.
I think it's also good if there's anybody, Christians and Christians who are striving to, whether it be making video games or making movies, TV shows, podcasts, YouTube channels. I think it's always good to pray for those people to become established and to succeed in what they're trying to do. And I'm thinking of him at this, I'm thinking of him right now. I think it's good to just encourage, and the best way to encourage is to pray for those people that it works out and God will bless them. Because we need more things like that out there. We need more people trying to do that and less people trying to do other things.
Dances on TikTok.
Yeah. We've been going for a while, so I think it's time we close. And we have never nailed down, maybe one time, maybe by the time we get to Revelation, we'll nail down a closing.
The closing outro. Thank you for listening, and hopefully you learned something and we didn't waste your time.
Yeah, and if we did, thank you for letting us waste your time.
And we will see you guys next time. Keep an eye out on Tavern of Fellowship on YouTube for the podcast videos. And obviously, if you're listening on Spotify, you've already found us.
Good job, you found us.
If you enjoyed this, if you could please share it with your friends and family, that would help us out tremendously. Thank you.
And also, if you would like to shut up, if you would like, if you would like to comment or correct us or ask questions, we will answer them to the best of our abilities. But more importantly, we will talk about them. More than likely, I expect people to ask questions about past verses, things we've already been through. So maybe towards the end of an episode, we will go back and address questions that people had or things they wanted us to talk about they feel like we skimmed over too quickly. So if that is you, then go ahead and drop it in the comments on YouTube.
And you can drop it on Spotify as well.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Alrighty, guys. Well, thank you all for listening, and God bless. We will catch you guys next time.
That's a wrap.
Hey, that's a wrap. My gosh, bro. You're freaking a boomer. You know what I mean?
What?